Probably one of the most common questions I see crop up in various Diablo and even just general action RPG communities is which Diablo to start with, and of course I answer the D&D version, because you know it's the best thing ever. Though, jokes aside, while the D&D version is interesting in a few rights, most people are looking for which video game to start with, so today we're going to look at where you should start to get the most enjoyment out of your time, since each game does have a reason to start there. Now that said, it would be easy for me to just say which one is my favorite, but that's not very helpful, since different people want different things from games, and they come into it with different experiences. All that combined with the fact that Diablo 4 will be releasing soon adds another common question of whether you should play through the previous games for the lore, or just get a feel for the genre. Thankfully for that last one, with at least the first 3 games, each title does a fairly good job of being able to stand on its own in regard to story and world building. And while playing previous games or even reading the books will provide you with additional context, it's not going to hurt your experience to not have heard every lore book in Diablo 1, or listened to every gossip and quest log in Diablo 2, or even found every lore blurb on the ground in Diablo 3 or Immortal. But if you do want to explore the world in order and find all that lore throughout, while the release order is Diablo 1, 2, 3, then Immortal, it is important to remember that Immortal actually occurs between 2 and 3, and a lot of lore is placed for just MacGuffins for power changes with each instance of the game. Though in the end, it does generally come down to a "but wait, there's more" type deal game to game as far as the story is concerned. Now, as far as the importance in lore, Diablo 1 mostly just establishes some rudimentary basics of the world and injects it with a number of lore books scattered throughout the dungeons, so it's not going to give you an extensive knowledge of the game or the world, but it will introduce you to how the new conflict started. And interestingly enough, it is one situation where the PlayStation version may be more digestible for you, at least lore-wise, since it allows you to listen to the world lore from a menu rather than just happening to stumble upon it like in the PC version. Though admittedly, hard copies of the PlayStation version are getting pretty pricey, while the PC version is just $10 on GOG and comes with the non-canon expansion Hellfire. For Diablo 2, despite having more dialogue, it is even more lore light in terms of the world as a whole, but it covers a more modern arc that starts after the events of Diablo 1, with the player characters from the original game actually having lore presence here as well, which you can dig up information about through the gossip of the NPCs in various acts. Most of the lore here, though, is much more immediate to the game rather than the world as a whole, at least compared to the other entries. Though Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 also saw an increase in external lore sources like physical books, serving to tell the world stories that happen outside the scope of the games. With Diablo 2's lore sticking primarily with the formula of this happened back then and this is how we are impacted now, as opposed to the actual historical books and diaries like we found in Diablo 1. In Immortal, well, it's mostly fluff. There is a bit of story here, but it's mainly just enough to keep you moving on, and is meant to fill a bit of a gap between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, as we mentioned. But it is by far the least productive whenever it comes to building actual structure in the world, almost entirely focused on immediacy of the next quest or objective to keep you playing. Now for Diablo 3, it does some things better and some things worse. The overall story arc is often dismissed for being weaker than the other mainline games, and to an extent I would agree, but it also includes a lot more personal and journal-style lore of iconic figures in the world to help you understand more about what's going on, and like the previous entries, it is voice-acted to help it out as well. The main catch for Diablo 3 is it does lean even heavier into the MacGuffinitis for the main story, so it will often feel a bit more stilted than the other titles, despite technically having more information available. The only one that is worse about this is, as mentioned, Immortal. Overall, if you're just interested in a quick rundown of the story, various lore channels can be found fine for just getting that, but if you want to experience it firsthand, starting with Diablo 1 will never be a mistake. And the only one that really has no redeeming value in this regard was Immortal, so I'd say only play it for lore if you're really bored and possibly on a toilet at the time. Now in terms of gameplay, which is a whole different can of worms, all 3 of the mainline games play quite differently, and there will be people who love one and hate the others. This is because they almost fit into 3 entirely different genres. Diablo 1 is the most methodical and takes far more inspiration from its horror roots and the fact that it was originally going to be turn-based, much like the original Rogue, to help kind of understand this aspect. For more fast-paced players who want more arcade-style games, it will be frustrating and it will feel sluggish at best. For people who come from genres like CRPGs or proper turn-based roguelikes, it will feel much more familiar and have the weight and intent you're looking for. Diablo 3 is the exact opposite end of the spectrum, with big numbers, flashy lights, fast movement, and dizzying speed being the general goal of play, although it's not as bad as some other action RPGs. You'll find some people who come from more fast-paced and action-packed titles will appreciate this one more than the other entries, but more methodical players will find it tiresome and unengaging. Diablo 2, however, oddly enough lands between these extremes, with a tendency more towards methodical play, but with quality of life features like a run button, better visibility, and more diverse areas of effects on spells, though much like Diablo 1, it has one major flaw that Diablo 3 interestingly has covered, and that is post-game content, which, while I personally have little interest in the post-game kind of dives of modern action RPGs, it can be a turnoff for people that want more long-term investments whenever they pick up a new game. Now, sure, Diablo 2 has chase gear and optimization and all that jazz. It even has some post-game bosses in the form of Ubers, and with Resurrected, it has gained terror zones as well. These all serve mostly to speed up gathering gear for theory crafting rather than getting bigger numbers on things like rifts. Now, as far as Immortal and how it fits into all of this, it's closer to Diablo 3 with just more mobile game sensibility than computer or console game sensibility, but it can be played with a controller on all platforms. That said, with the release of Diablo 2 Resurrected, all the Diablo games have at least one form that can be played with a controller, even if it's a console exclusive for the original, so they can be played in a more laid-back manner. So generally speaking, if you're looking at it from a strictly gameplay standpoint, Diablo 1 is your methodical player game, Diablo 2 is your theory crafter fodder, and if you prefer more progress without inhibition, Diablo 3 is your top pick. This is also reflected in how the combat and skill systems work in the different games. This is seen with Diablo 1 pretty much just letting you adjust your stats, and any skills you use are basically a small number of class-specific perks combined with your character's ability to read skill books, meaning with the right setup, a warrior can cast spells and usually will, a sorcerer can swing swords and usually will, and a rogue can do both of the above, or you can play more optimally and give your warrior a sword with his faster swing speed, have your sorcerer cast spells with his faster cast speed, and have the rogue shoot her bow with faster ranged attacks, just to make life easier on you. So while there isn't much distinguishing one sorcerer from another other than the books they found along the way, the characters do feel distinct class kind of differences due to power limitations, while remaining familiar since they all share this core toolset of attacks and spells that anybody can learn. Diablo 2, on the flip side, expands the player decisions in their build by replacing the book system that allowed every class to use every spell with actual skill tree systems to make the classes more distinct, in addition to some class-specific perks and growth patterns. And with this skill tree system, it uses a point system for investment in those skills, which prevents you from just having them all. So one paladin player may go extremely heavy melee, while the other might go heavy caster, making even characters of the same class able to fill different roles with the right investment, and make characters feel more personalized to the player. Diablo 3 sadly backpedaled a bit in this regard, partially due to it being moved to a different studio from the first two, and also just the nature of being designed to appeal to a broader base. For this game, you lose control of your stats, instead having them auto-grow, and having gear modifying them to adjust your damage. And skills now became pretty freely swappable with the removal of a skill point system. This made it easier for you to try different builds as you gained access to new skills, but on the flip side, it also meant that once your character hit max level, there really was no point in leveling a second instance of that class, since you could swap builds on a dime. So generally you'll find your main goal after that is just to farm Paragon points for incremental boosts in power, and possibly gear farming to min-max your resources. This last part is especially noteworthy since Diablo 3 moved away from the open trading that was possible in the first two games, instead making it so players generally had to find their own gear along the way. And while the auction house was a thing previously, it no longer exists, so you can't really use it as part of the discussion. So if you have bad luck, it may not be ideal for you, but they do open up other methods of farming various items or getting them through various achievements. Though since Diablo 1, on the flip side, doesn't have much of a community these days, it does have kind of a similar problem. You'll generally be farming by yourself, unless you get a playgroup together just for that. And when you do that, the friendly fire might end up having the monopoly effect on friendships because, hey, Diablo 1, you can kill your friends pretty easily with that chain lightning. All of this somewhat culminates in the question of where Diablo 4 fits in all of this, with slower combat than Diablo 3, but still faster than Diablo 2, with lore likely being distributed in a much more MMO-style manner, which means a lot slower rolling, and likely tied to some level of grinding, not to mention a currently fairly limited trading economy that could probably learn a thing or two from last Epoch's plans, and sharing the always-online requirement of PC versions of Diablo 3, it's going to be a mixed bag. To really see where it's going to fit in all of the formulas, though, we really do have to wait for a hands-on, and much like Diablo 3, since it's a mandatory online, we're going to have to wait and see how it looks in 3 months, 6 months, a year, etc. after release, since it will change and will likely suffer from MMO bloat, which will change where it falls into the recommendations as time goes on. So the too long didn't watch. If you're looking for the lore and want to experience it firsthand, then start at the original. The gameplay may not be exactly what you want, or even indicative of what to expect from Diablo 4, but it will get you caught up on the world. Though lore videos would be a lot faster and, well, cheaper. And if you're looking to just get used to the gameplay, Diablo 3 is going to be kind of probably the better choice for getting used to how Diablo 4 will play. But Diablo 2 would not be a bad option since it is on the other side of the line that Diablo 4 is looking to straddle. Just expect Diablo 4 to lean more into that post-game style of Diablo 3. And if you're just looking for the best overall Diablo to start on, even if you don't plan on playing Diablo 4, then personally I would generally lean towards Diablo 2, just because it does a lot of things really well, even if it does have its own blemishes like the stamina bar and some odd balance choices at higher difficulties. It overall is the best mix on the pile in my opinion. Beyond that, the only time you should dip into Immortal is if you're looking for something free to play, since it's a good enough game, but it doesn't bring anything new to the table and is absolutely dripping in microtransactions, predatory practices, and some sketchy crap beyond that. But if you just want to play the story over the course of a couple weeks, or while you're using the bathroom, it's fine enough. And last in line is Diablo 4. It will probably be pretty much the only choice though if you want the newest and shiniest and most popular option. Though with forced multiplayer and sadly a lean into the modern microtransaction hell that is the tendency of games as a disservice, there are some caveats. Though all in all, we'll have to wait to see if it's predatory or not in its design, and we'll have to wait to see if it really lives up to the promises. But for the love of God, don't pre-order it until some reviews, or at least first impressions, or even just the early access kind of show of it gets in place. It's not going to hurt to wait until closer to release to dump what is actually a lot of money for an action RPG. So all that said, to the Diablo veterans, what game do you think people should start with? And to those new to the franchise, which sounds most enticing to you? Mention it down below, and as always, keep gaming, have fun, and peace out. This has been Alzorath. Bye.